First Kings 10 and Second Chronicles 9. First Kings 10 records yet another detailed account of Solomon's wealth and wisdom, similar to previous accounts in, for instance, First Kings 3 to 4. Why did the Queen of Sheba visit King Solomon? The visit of the Queen of Sheba was motivated by Solomon's mercantile endeavors as well as her own desires to meet Solomon, to see the glories of his kingdom and test his highly esteemed wisdom. She wanted to satisfy her curiosity, for she had heard of his fame, especially for wisdom, and she came to prove him whether he was so great a man as he was reported to be. She came to hear his wisdom and thereby to improve her own, that she might be better able to govern her own kingdom. Jesus said in Matthew 12:42, "The Queen of Sheba will rise as the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here." Solomon's ships sailed near the coast of her country and may have made rest stops for fresh water. Maybe that's how she heard of the fame of Solomon. Queen of Sheba came not as one begging, but brought enough to bear her charges and abundantly to recompense. Recompense Solomon for his attention, bringing gold and precious stones and spices, because she came to trade for wisdom, which she would purchase at any rate. Sheba was a wealthy and highly civilized nation located in the southwest Arabia, and the queen brought with her expensive gifts that also serve as samples of what her country had to offer. In Isaiah 66, it says, "Herds of camel will cover your land, young camels in Midian and Ephah, and all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord." In Jeremiah 6:20, "What do I care about incense from Sheba, or sweet calamus from a distant land? Your burnt offerings are not acceptable. Your sacrifices do not please me." And then in Ezekiel 38:13, it states, "Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all her villages will say to you, 'Have you come to plunder? Have you gathered your horse to loot, to carry off silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, and to seize much plunder?'" These are the prophets, and it kind of tells you of the land of Sheba and the surrounding areas. And as we move on through the books of First and Second Kings, we will hit on some of these statements. Why was the Queen of Sheba so impressed by Solomon's temple? And the Queen of Sheba observation. "And when the Queen of Sheba had seen the wisdom of Solomon, the house of Solomon, the food of his table, the seating of his officials, the attendants and clothing of his servants and cupbearers, his burnt offerings that he offered at the house of the Lord, there was no more breath left in her. And that's 1 Kings 10:4 and 5. The record of her visit gives us an opportunity to get a glimpse of life in the palace. The queen not only marveled at Solomon's palace, but she was impressed by the meals, the livery, and the conduct of the servants. That's by the special uniforms worn by the servants and their conducts. She admired the building and furniture of his palace, the provisions that was made every day for his table. As Matthew Henry said she saw all the meat and wondered who was going to eat it all. And then she saw all the servants and wondered where the meat for all these servants, attendants, and guests, where were the meat? She noticed the orderly sitting of his servants and everyone in his place, and ready attendance of his ministers without any confusion, their rich uniforms, and the uh, property which his cup bearers waited at his table. She walked with Solomon on his private concourse to the temple where she watched him worship. Remember back in 1 Kings 4:7, Solomon had 12 district governors over all of Israel who supplied provisions for the king and the royal household. Each one had to provide supplies for 1 month in the year. And in 1 Kings 4:22-23, going back, it says Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cores of the finest flour and 60 cores of meal. In verse 23, 10 heads of stall-fed cattle, 20 of pasture-fed cattle, and hundreds of sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelle, roebucks, and choice fowl. This was daily. This was a daily provision. The Queen of Sheba couldn't have been impressed easily. When we look at the gifts that she brought, we know that she was also wealthy. What was going on behind the scene in Solomon's heart? We see the Solomon's excess. He had gold and silver. Solomon accumulated enormous quantities of silver and gold. He had thousands of horses. Solomon's stock and trade in horses from Egypt was huge. And as we go on into chapter 11, he had thousands of wives. Solomon's disobedience. To link the curious facts about Solomon's downfall, we regress to the time in the wilderness in the law given Moses. God anticipated the desire of the future nations to have a king. God made a law for every king, and you can see that in Deuteronomy 17:14-20. Solomon's heart began to change with expanding fame and wealth. Besides the growing number of palaces in Jerusalem, structures in other areas were needed to accommodate his increased international fame and fortune. Solomon's wisdom turned to developing international business ventures, ignoring the instructions of the king found in Deuteronomy 17:16. It states the king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them, for the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. Solomon not only acquired thousands of horses, but he became a horse dealer himself. Solomon developed a thriving wholesale horse trade. It wasn't long before Israel had become the world's principal horse trading center between the two famous horse breeding countries, the Hittites kingdom in the north and Egypt in the south. It is not difficult to believe that Solomon's heart was lifted with pride, and pride always leads to destruction and a fall. As written in Proverbs 16, 18, in the book of Proverbs, Solomon wrote, better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. Better a small serving of vegetables with love than fattened calves with hatred. And scholars have said that Solomon wrote the Proverbs in his older years. Why did Jesus commend the queen, even though she may or may not have gone back home to worship her God? In addition, what we willingly gave her out of his enormous bounty, Solomon did, um, must have been fabulous. But the greatest treasure she took back with her was the spiritual and moral wisdom of God had put into the heart of Solomon. Now, as the Queen of Sheba returns to her own country, the curtain falls, and we do not know how she acted upon the knowledge of God received from Solomon or when she died. We hear no more of her until the Lord Jesus Christ came into the world, and when exercising his public ministry, he said to a crowd gathered around him, the Queen of the South shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost part of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, a greater than Solomon is here. When the queen said, blessed be the Lord your God, she wasn't affirming her personal faith in Yahweh. People in those days believed in territorial destinies. Each nation had its own god or gods, and when you lift your land, you lift your god. When you left your land, you left your gods behind. Once she returned home, the queen would worship the God of her own land, even though she had seen the glories of God of Israel and heard of his wisdom. Jesus didn't commend the Queen of Sheba for her faith, but for the fact that she made every effort to travel 1,500 miles to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And when the Son of God, one greater than Solomon, was in the midst of the Jewish people, they did not seek him. It's the tragedy of lost opportunity. And so we kind of see that the way that Queen Sheba came to Solomon is kind of a way that we should come to Jesus. We should come seeking his wisdom. We should come bringing all of us, all that we have for him. As she brought the treasures of her land, we should bring our own self, giving him all our praise, giving him all that is on our heart, as she had seeked Solomon with everything that she had on her heart with questions. We too should come to Jesus in that same type of way that Queen of Sheba came to Solomon. We're going to move on to 1 Kings chapter 11, right? Yeah. 1 Kings chapter 11. So I do hope that you will join us as we come to the closing of King Solomon and his death. And we're going to be hitting up on in the next few chapters from Israel being one nation as it becomes to a divided kingdom as Solomon's sons, um, I should say, son become king, some of his military. I don't want to do a spoiler alert. And we'll get into the prophets. Okay? Hope to see you later.